Dare to enter Crow's Quill's books, where tales of forgotten realms and fearless souls come alive. Today's journey, Raven's Prophecy. The Elder Trials, Prologue and Chapter 1, by Mark and James Lindsay. Will you uncover the truth hidden in the shadows? Prologue. The mystical cloaked figures drifted through the heavy mist, their movements slow and methodical. For over 500 years they had listened to tales of the prophecy. There were 13 in total, 12 priests and priestesses, dressed in heavy hooded robes, all from different orders, representing the 12 true gods. They escorted a young, heavily pregnant woman, her groans and whimpers cutting through the night. The priests had traveled long and far, over lands both treacherous and unknown, then finally across the icy waters of the Lost Sea to the Isle of Sorrow. It was here that the priests would see the end of generations, the end of watching and waiting. The Isle of Sorrow was just that, a jagged rocky coastline that had caused the tragic end of many a foolish captain and his unfortunate ship. Once past the coast, there was the sheer cliff faces that towered over 1,000 feet above the raging ocean below. The priests had been well informed, though. The route across the sea made easier as they sailed selected currents, arriving at the only safe entry along the coast, a gap just wide enough to allow a small vessel through. From there, the priests followed a narrow path that traversed the towering cliffs. At times it seemed that a higher power was guiding them along the skinny trail. At the top of the cliffs, they were confronted by a forest of petrified trees, their bare, naked branches seeming to reach out for any foolish enough to venture in. The dank, thick fog that covered the gray, swirling waters below had also penetrated the dizzying heights of the cliffs, and despite their faith and vows, many of the priests faltered in the depths of the forest, the sounds of moaning and screams echoing all around them. It was within the forest that the pregnant woman's labor began. They rested little. They knew that they could ill afford for the baby to be born outside of the designated prophesied site. They emerged from the forest and saw their final destination. Standing on a small cresting hill, they stared in awe of giant stone pillars, arranged in a large circular configuration that was clearly designed for the purpose of pagan rituals, although if that were the case, it had been many years since its last use, as the entire area was now overrun with waist-high ferns and shrubbery. The priests were by now carrying the pregnant girl, whose cries had gotten louder and more intense. The women within the group did their best to soothe her pain, with little success. At the center of the stone circle, they laid a blanket carefully on a stone slab, followed by the pregnant woman accompanied with deep, resonating chanting. As the priestesses went about the delivery of the baby, the priests systematically began lighting several decent fires around the thrashing girl. Within minutes, there was both a glow against the gloom and a warmth against the supernatural cold. The oldest amongst them was a priestess named Bray. Her skills in midwifery were without equal, so when the girl's contractions were at their peak, she knew it was time, and nodded to the others. Bray motioned for the youngest priestess to assist her, and the remaining 10 holy men and women linked hands and created a circle around the laboring woman, whose screams were louder and more painful. The priests swayed from side to side, their holy chanting echoing through the clearing. They kept it up for nearly an hour, despite the fatigue they all felt. The physical contact with one another made them strong. A baby's cry cut through the night, and the priests faltered for a split second, then continued on with their ceremony, each one fully aware of the importance of their duties. Bray wrapped the tiny baby in a lamb's wool blanket, then held it aloft. The young woman attempted to see what was happening before she collapsed back onto the hard stone. "Bray, I fear for Fridas," the younger priestess hissed. "The White Raven woman is strong, you have nothing to fear." Bray stopped in mid-sentence as she glanced down and saw the large pool of blood gathering under the newborn's mother, and before she could respond, an arrow appeared from the center of her chest, mere inches from where she was holding the baby. She froze and stared at the fletchings. They were unusual gray feathers, covered in small black flecks, with the tips a dark red, like blood. The younger priestess, who was too busy dealing with the bleeding girl, hadn't noticed the reaction of Bro, until the older woman slumped to her knees next to her. It was only then that the younger priestess realized the full gravity of the situation and let loose with a terrified scream. All this happened in seconds. The other holy men and women stirred from their ceremony. Figures cloaked in darkness sprang up from the surrounding ferns and rushed the stone altar. Over a dozen large bearded men dressed in heavy, coarse pelts, the pelts of predatory animals, raced towards the center of the ceremony. In their hands they carried large, crude swords and battle axes, chipped and worn from years of battle. They were as silent as a morning breeze, and despite their obvious intentions, none of their number spoke. Still reeling at the sight of Bray, they were completely unprepared for what followed next. It was like lambs to the slaughter. As the barbarians descended on the priests, wielding their weapons of destruction, they fell like wheat under a farmer's scythe. The carnage was swift and brutal. As the last priest from the circle fell, the barbarians held their positions and stared in towards the remaining 3 on the stone altar. The woman known as Freydis was ashen white, her breathing quiet and faint, her cooling blood covering the rock on which she now lay. The young priestess was now clutching the newborn baby, her grip deathly tight. She watched in horror as one of the barbarians stepped forward. He was larger than the others, both in height and muscle. He wore a bear's skull that had been fashioned into a helmet, and as he approached, he slowly removed it from his head. The priestess shuddered at what she saw beneath. The barbarian was much like the others. Long, dark, ragged hair and beard, scars that crisscrossed the surface of his face. But what sent a chill of dread through the priestess's face were the dead, soulless eyes that stared hungrily at what she held tight to her chest. The barbarian stood over the priestess with the large, frightened eyes. He looked at the woman who had just given birth and the copious amount of blood that now covered her. If she wasn't dead, she soon would be, the man thought. He returned his gaze towards the real reason for his being there. The newborn. "Give me the infant, and your death will be swift and painless," the barbarian growled. The barbarian held out a rough, calloused hand. It was obvious that the priestess was scared, but she bit her lower lip and shook her head. "I'll not ask again," he said. "Who are you? What is your name?" the priestess asked. "We are of the Skollreaver Clan. I am their king." Bear Slayer," the barbarian said, and faster than the priestess could blink. He removed his sword from its scabbard and sliced the air with its blade, his hand dropping back to his side when he was done. The priestess swallowed, the sound slow and wet, her eyes already growing dull as her head slid from its slender neck and hit the grassy ground with a dull thud. Quickly stepped forward and retrieved the baby before the priestess's arms released their hold. Ignoring his kill, he peeled back the layers of cloth and stared down at the young baby, within 2 young, innocent eyes stared back. One blue, the other red. Smiled and held the baby high in the air. The other barbarians banged their weapons noisily on shields and armor chest plates in response. After the barbarians had vacated the sacred ceremony site, the woman known as Freydis White Raven sat up and screamed despite her blood loss. Fate was far from done with her, and for the second time that night, labor contractions racked her body. As she prepared to push, a weak hand grasped hers and whispered, "You're not alone." Freydis looked to her side and was surprised to see Bray, the older priestess. She still bore an arrow protruding from her chest, only an inch or 2 from her heart, but not enough to kill her. Yet. Her labor was quicker than the last. Freydis gave it everything she had, including her life in the end. The baby was born silent. Bray feared the worst, but after inspecting the infant, she found no cause for alarm. The baby was a girl, quiet and thoughtful, and when she stared at Bray, the older woman gasped at the 2 different colored eyes. One blue, the other green. Ulrich Mace stared hard into the fire. Druid, his wife of 10 years, was curled up next to him, wrapped tight in a blanket. Despite the decent fire he had set before them, the wind that blew tonight chilled them both to the bone. In fact, it was more than that. It felt ominous. He rubbed the pendant that hung around his neck, a bronze-shaped tree that was covered in runes, a symbol of Tyr, the god of the forest, hoping that the large, bearded deity would protect them against any evil that dwelt within the darkness. Ulrich placed a large, calloused hand on his wife as the fire crackled. Between the two, he felt somewhat calmed. He began to drift off to slumber when the sound of a stick snapping in the distance roused him from sleep. Careful not to wake Druid, he slowly climbed to his feet, grasping his large iron warhammer in both hands. His eyes burned into the surrounding trees. Minutes ticked by. Ulrich cursed himself as a fool, and was just about to return to his place by the fire when another snap sounded somewhere before him. Whatever was out there was getting closer. He could now hear the rustle of bushes. "What is it?" Druid hissed behind him. She had sensed his absence and now knew that something terrible was upon them. "Keep quiet," he growled back, his attention now diverted. He was caught off guard as a shadowy figure staggered out of the tree line. "Stay thy ground!" Ulrich commanded, his formidable hammer poised to strike. "Wait!" Druid yelled. Ulrich froze as his wife pushed past him and caught the figure as it collapsed to the ground. It was an elderly woman. "Get her to the fire." Ulrich picked her up with ease, his massive frame half lifting, half dragging the woman to the nearby fire. It was at this moment that they saw her wounds, and what she had gripped tight within her arms. "It's a baby," Ulrich whispered. "You have to! Help her!" Bray said, her breath coming in ragged shudders. Blood covered her mouth. Druid didn't hesitate as she grabbed the small bundle and nursed it close to the flickering flames. "She's in grave danger." "Shh, you must save your energy," Ulrich instructed, but the old priestess shook her head and opened the front of her robe. Within the jagged end of an arrow stuck out roughly from her sternum. Dried blackish blood covered her skin and robe. "There is no time for me. You have to heed my warning. Dark forces rally against you. This girl needs protecting." Bray held a silver chain, and dangling from it a silver feather, Ulrich gently took it from her. "What does it mean?" he asked, turning his gaze back to the woman, only to find her lifeless eyes staring back. "How is she?" Druid asked. "She's dead," Ulrich replied, indicating the now dead woman. "What did she mean about dark forces?" Druid asked. "I don't know. She gave me this," Ulrich replied, and held the pendant up to the light of the fire. His expression was one of confusion. "It looks like a bird's feather," Druid said. "I think there's writing on the back. But the letters are like nothing that I've ever seen before," Ulrich muttered. "What is this all about, little one?" Druid whispered softly, and ever so gently she peeled back the blanket to get a closer look. She gasped. "By Tyr." Her eyes. Chapter 1. Blood splattered the dirt floor as Magnus fell to his knees. He hated that it was mandatory for him to train hand-to-hand combat. Considering his short and slight frame, the other children teased that he was built like a polearm, except that in his case he was completely useless in battle. The time of the Elder Trials was nearly upon them, and Magnus wanted to improve his chances of gaining an apprenticeship with a master. Then he could help his mother. Magnus had never known his father, who had passed away when he was only a child. Brief memories of a mountain of a man with a generous heart made him feel terrible when he thought of the hardships his mother endured daily. The last few months, Magnus had been attending the mandatory combat training that all teenage boys in the village must take. He was also hoping that it might lead to placement in the Grey Watch, although in all the time he had been training, he hadn't appeared to improve in the slightest. To make matters worse, today he had been paired against Erik, the greatest fighter and hunter out of all the young men in the village. The previous winter, during a clan hunting expedition, they had been attacked by a rogue grizzly bear, driven mad from starvation. It had killed one of their party and wounded several others, including Erik, who now bore 2 jagged scars from the claws of the bear down the right side of his face. These marks only added to the teen's mystique and allure. Now all the village girls blushed at the mere sight of him as he strutted past. Erik was very aware of his reputation, and he loved it. Magnus and Erik had been sparring for nearly an hour, the larger boy taking his time, ruthlessly putting the smaller teen on show in front of the small audience of admiring young girls. Erik had just dropped Magnus with a crushing right punch, and was about to follow up with a finishing blow when Bjorn the Battlemaster blew his ornate goat horn, signaling the end of the day. "Thanks for the warm-up," Grub! Erik snarled, pushing past his smaller opponent. Magnus knew this routine well enough and lowered his head, being careful to avoid eye contact with Erik. "He's gone," a soft voice from behind said. Magnus knew who the voice belonged to. His oldest and closest friend, Astrid. He glanced around. The sun was directly behind her, its golden light turning her usual raven-colored hair an ethereal golden color. "That oaf is going to fall hard one of these days, and I seriously want to be there when it happens." All of the Neophytes ate in the hall at the same time every day. The food was basic, but hearty. But for generations, whenever a child turned 13, they were made to compete in the trials and challenges, known only as the Elder Trials. This determined a person's place within the community, such as stonemason, carpenter, trooper, or if you were unlucky, mill hand or scullion rat. It was important to have vision of what you wanted in life, or going into the Elder Trials might mean a lifetime in lowly servitude. Magnus knew that the possibilities of him becoming a Greywatch trooper were slim at best. He held a talent for potions and medicines. Unfortunately, the apothecary position was handed down through the same bloodlines for centuries, so an apprenticeship in that field was almost impossible. Magnus sat at a table with 5 other neophytes, including the girl with the black hair. Astrid was different than the other people of the village. She didn't care about village gossip and talk about the trials. Her only concerns were about her family and close friends. She dressed plainly, and when she was seen running errands within the village, Astrid wore her hair in a way that obscured her face, and it was because of this that many barely knew her at all, which was fine with Astrid. So I heard. "Really, we've been only sitting here 5 minutes, and you have to bring up the Elder Trials." Magnus sighed and shook his head at Den, a gangly, dark-skinned youth with a penchant for village gossip, who shrugged sheepishly back. "Well, we're waiting," Astrid urged. "As I was saying, I heard that there may be a vacancy with Lord Asolf's game warden." Den beamed. "Gunna is taking an apprentice," Magnus said incredulous. "Rubbish. Gunna would never take on anyone," Ivar, a short, stout boy, dismissed. "He has to eventually," Den argued. "I heard that bitter old man was planning to live forever," Ivar scoffed. "Now who's talking rubbish? He may have put off his standing in the Elder Trials for years, but it is law that a master has to train an apprentice before they die. The gods decree it, or they deny themselves a place in the afterlife," Magnus warned. "So maybe there is truth to the rumors," Astrid interjected. Everyone at the table nodded in agreement. "You're kidding yourself if you think you have a chance at that position," a voice from behind sneered. They all knew who it belonged to. Even before they tuned, Erik was standing confidently with hands on both hips and chest puffed out. He was flanked on either side by 2 even larger boys, Rangvald and Torben, known for their strength and little else. Their slack, vacant expressions accurately indicated a less than average intellect. "Do we really have to do this?" Magnus sighed. Erik ignored the question, relishing the unease he was having on them all. "Someone has to," Den interjected, then regretted it immediately. "And I suppose that someone is you?" Erik said, and placed what seemed like a friendly hand on the smaller boy's shoulder. Only the pressure he then exerted was clearly meant to cause pain. Rangvald and Torben chuckled. "Nobody gets to choose. Only Volin the All-Seeing has the power and the ability to dictate who goes where." Astrid spoke up, not wanting to get involved, but hating the power this bully had over the others. Through her hair, she focused one clear blue eye on Erik. He stared back, not intimidated. "Astrid, isn't it? The blacksmith's daughter. I'll let you in on a well-known secret. You're a female, and no one cares what you have to say. This is men's business, or as close to it as they come. The best you can hope for is to become a midwife or a garment maker. And as for your little girly friend, I see Scullion Rat in his future." Erik pointed towards Magnus, who was blushing furiously. "Later, ladies," Erik sneered, and with his 2 thick friends, departed the dining hall. "Don't let it get you down," Astrid said, noticing her friend's sudden dark turn. "It's not that, He shouldn't speak to you like that, I should have." Magnus's voice trailed off. "You didn't do anything wrong. Erik's just a big insecure bully. Besides, I may only be a girl, but I can take care of myself," Astrid said confidently. After breakfast, Astrid returned home. It was similar to a lot of homes in the area. Made from timber, its tall, peaked roof reaching down and nearly touching the ground, thick green grass covered its surface, insulation against the snow in winter. Smoke drifted lazily from the central chimney. Astrid skipped along the stone, moss-covered steps towards the giant timber and steel-covered front door. The moment she pushed it aside, the young girl knew exactly what her mother had been up to. The sweet smell of spiced apples and cooked pastry wafted out from the kitchen, greeting Astrid and nearly lifting her from her feet. Astrid Mace slipped the heavy timber peel into the wood-fired oven, its flat shovel-like blade expertly sliding under the golden-brown pies within. This was her favorite part, the culmination of hard work and skill, then seeing the finished product. "You made pies," Astrid squealed with delight as she burst into the kitchen. Hearing her voice, Turid turned and regarded her daughter, and as always, she balanced a frown with a smile. Astrid was wearing a long blue dress, like the other women and girls in the village, but that's where her feminine tastes ended, because she was very much her father's daughter. Over her dress, she had on a leather apron and crisscrossing belts over each shoulder. She finished the look with a pair of heavy leather boots, 2 sizes too large. Would it kill you to at least braid your hair? Turid sighed. "I started to. Then it kind of went south on me," Astrid replied wistfully. "Of course." "I'm sorry I wasn't here to help with the pastries," Astrid said, staring at the little pockets of heaven lined up on the counter. "Oh, I wouldn't say you missed helping me, dear," Turid replied, indicating the mess made during the cooking. Astrid groaned. "I'd love to, but Father needs me, and I wouldn't want to let." "I'm sure he'll understand if you're a little late," Turid said, guiding her daughter towards the pile of dirty plates and utensils. Thanks, Mother." Astrid couldn't wait to get to her father's forge, and it wasn't just to see him, but to see if he had made any progress on his latest secret project. A project so secret that Astrid hadn't even been able to get a glimpse of it, despite trying to catch a peek over the last 3 months. The forge was a sizable stone structure with a simple thatch roof. From a distance she could see the glow of the hearth and the pounding of a hammer on iron, hoping to catch Papa in the act. Astrid burst through the open doorway, hoping to finally see what had kept him busy for so long. "Aha!" Astrid cried triumphantly, her elation quickly turning to disappointment. Ulrich Mace glanced up from his anvil, peering towards his daughter in the dim light. He placed down his hammer. "I'm sorry, miss. This is no place for a pretty maiden, you should." Ulrich's voice trailing off with a grin. "Oh, Papa, you know it's me." Astrid beamed and raced into her father's arms, the mixed smell of raw leather, timber, and ore, in her opinion, the greatest smell in the world. "I swear to the gods, I thought some royal maiden had gotten lost and wandered into my humble forge," Ulrich said, and swept up the laughing teenage girl in his arms and twirled her around, before placing her gently back down. "You say that all the time." "Would a royal maiden be dressed like this?" Astrid quipped, and pointed to her clothes. "If your mother had anything to do about it." "Yes," Ulrich replied with a chuckle. Then a thought hit him. "What are you doing here anyway? I thought that you had training this morning." "I did, but we're finished for the day," Astrid said. "Already?" "But that would mean that it's close to midday?" Ulrich said, confused. "That's right, which is why I'm here, and why I was hoping to catch you with the thing," Astrid said provocatively. "Ha, you wish," Ulrich said with a smirk. "Grr, why can't you show me? Just a peek. I am your only daughter after all," Astrid pouted. "You'll see." "In time," Ulrich said with one eyebrow raised, and made his way back to his anvil, where he had been fashioning a length of iron into a cartwheel. "But if you really want to help, the fire could use some stoking." Astrid nodded and stomped slowly over to the bellows, a flexible leather bag, held together with 2 wooden handles, that when brought together collapsed the bag within, blowing a long stream of air. This air fueled the smoldering embers inside the hearth, and only a blazing hearth had the ability to heat the iron and make it malleable. The bellow was huge, and required a great deal of strength to operate, and despite her size, the young girl had acquired the muscle to do just that. Astrid had been working in the forge since she was 5, partly because her father liked to keep his daughter close by, but mostly because Astrid was fascinated with the profession her father was skilled in. the ability to make and create, using fire, iron ore, strength, and vision, and it was because of her interest, and years assisting her father, that she now possessed a considerable talent. That seals today's tale in shadows. We hope Raven's prophecy, The Elder Trials, has drawn you deeper into its enigma. Return soon to Crow's Quill's books, where the next chapter awaits, whispering secrets yet untold.